From a trip to Poland on the Ukrainian border and in Krakow and in Warsaw, where I met with our brave troops and diplomats stationed on NATO's eastern flank near the border with Ukraine. I also visited Warsaw and Brussels to meet with Polish, EU, and NATO leaders to discuss our ongoing unity and resolve in the face of Putin's murderous campaign against the Ukrainian people. I'd like to share some thoughts with you on my experiences on this trip. First, I was struck by the spirit and the soul of the Ukrainian people, even as they faced the greatest evil imaginable in a war in which Russian soldiers are indiscriminately killing civilians, using rape and torture as weapons of war, and purposely starving and freezing the population, including children, the elderly, and the disabled. I spoke with a young woman from Bucha who fled from Ukraine at the war stopped. This is the town that will now join the tragic ranks of Daliar, Aleppo, Srebrenica, where just mentioning the name evokes the horror of the atrocities committed there. This young woman told me that despite the horrors, she is anxious to return to her town, to her apartment building, so that it is possible for her to rebuild her life. But she also told me that her father and her brother and her husband are still back and fighting the Russians on the front. I toured a hospital which didn't even exist 7 weeks ago, but was quickly erected and operationalized through the work of everyday people and generous donors, where Chef Jose Andres and his amazing team at World Central Kitchen are feeding 250 Ukrainian refugees every single day. They have found 250 beds to put into this building. They are providing schooling for every Ukrainian child who has come to Poland. They have provided language training for all of those who have arrived at this facility. So this is an amazing response by the Polish people to ensure that the Ukrainians who have fled will be able to know that they are going to be taken care of until this war has been completed. So we reached a point where in the facility, 4 young Ukrainian girls asked if they could sing, and they did. They sang the Ukrainian national anthem, which brought tears to my eyes and to the eyes of everyone else who was in the room on that afternoon. It was very powerful. These are very strong, committed people. And the Poles are doing everything they can to make sure that the Ukrainians know that they are going to find a home until the Ukrainian home is restored once again to their people. So this is what the cynical KGB officer Vladimir Putin did not anticipate when he launched his doomed war. He said Ukraine was not even a country. 60 days after his invasion, the Ukrainian spirit not only persists, it is stronger than ever, lifted by the shared experience of people who were targeted for elimination, but who now know that they will prevail. Second, the transatlantic relationship rooted in the shared values of democratic governance and respect for human rights is stronger than ever, and we are working in lockstep with our allies in purpose and in unity to protect NATO's borders and support the Ukrainian people and government and provide assistance amidst the greatest humanitarian disaster in Europe since World War II. And I must take a moment to recognize the immense generosity, once again, of the Polish people and government who have opened the doors to their homes and schools and social services to millions of Ukrainian refugees. It is hard to envision the scale of the migration the Polish representative to NATO told me that right now, because of the influx of Ukraine's fleeing Putin's campaign of violence, Poland's population is currently 12 to 13% Ukrainian just in the last 8 weeks. That's how huge this migration has been. The way that Poland and many of our European partners have welcomed Ukrainian refugees is a testament to our shared humanity in times of crisis. The United States must step up and do more to offer refuge to the Ukrainians, as well as refugees from other countries around the world on our shores. President Biden has reassembled our refugee admission program after it was dismantled by President Trump and Stephen Miller. But we must go further and raise the refugee cap even higher. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free has always guided how we treat all of those fleeing war and persecution. The theme I heard across my visit is that the wounds of the Second World War and Soviet-style communism are still fresh for many of our Eastern European allies. They understand what it means to live through the destruction of a country, the loss of freedom. They want to help Ukraine refugees, and they also viscerally feel the threat that Vladimir Putin poses to their own freedom with his delusional desire to revive the Russian Empire. Their spirit of generosity is genuine and also rooted in the deep understanding that they could be next. Third, the U.S. support for the Ukrainian people, for NATO, and for our European alliances is absolutely unwavering. The troops stationed with our 82nd Airborne Division in Poland near the Ukraine border, where I visited, were eager and committed to our Polish and NATO partners. There I met Sergeant Luz from Malden, who grew up one street over from my house in the Edgeworth section of Malden, and who was there in Poland representing what I know is Massachusetts' overwhelming support for Ukraine and for our European allies. The United States must continue to provide the assistance Ukraine needs to withstand the ongoing Russian assault and meet Ukrainians' humanitarian needs. We must continue to work with our NATO allies to fortify our collective security and adjust to the new reality on the ground given Russia's aggression. And we must do everything we can to avoid a direct conflict between the United States and Russia, which possess the world's largest nuclear weapons arsenals. We must work to wean ourselves and our European allies from our addiction to Russian oil and gas so that we no longer send billions of dollars to line the pockets of Putin and his corrupt Russian oil guys. And we must continue to push for a negotiated end to the war on terms the Ukrainians must negotiate in their own national interest. And finally, I'll close with thoughts shared with me by Sophia Radzikol's, a Holocaust survivor I met at the Jewish Community Center in Krakow. Sophia was a child during World War II, saved along with her mother by Poles who risked their lives to keep them safe. Krakow is just miles from the infamous Auschwitz death camp, the site of perhaps the greatest acts of inhumanity in recorded history. I asked Sophia how she could possibly build a life in Krakow so close to Auschwitz, in the same community as some of the perpetrators who inflicted such horrors on her people. She put it very simply. She has witnessed both sides of humanity, she said. She saw the very worst, but she also benefited from the very best in those who helped save her and her mother's life. I feel we are at another historic moment. We were once again, unfortunately, witnessing the worst of humanity in Vladimir Putin and his troops, who have shown a vile level of callousness and lack of regard for the dignity of human life. Putin's enablers around the world also deserve our scorn. But we are also witnessing the best in the millions of Poles, Romanians, Moldovans, Hungarians, and others who have welcomed Ukrainians into their homes. In the Ukrainian leaders who are determined to repel the Russian assault and be a beacon of strength for the people, and the leaders and diplomats and humanitarian and healthcare workers who've been working tirelessly day and night to get the assistance where it is most needed in Ukraine. And of course, in the hopeful resolve of the Ukrainian people themselves. I think about the Ukrainian girls singing in the World Central Kitchen. The Ukraine they will be given to when Russian soldiers retreat. That will be a very different country from those young girls play. They will rebuild a stronger Ukraine with our help. One that is free, one that is prosperous, and one that reflects the steely resolve of the people of Ukraine. So we thank you all so much for being here today. Love to fix it.
Senator, question about Putin's miscalculation of the Ukrainian people. This week he talked about he doesn't think NATO and the West has the resolve to stop the Russian.
I spent a day and a half in Brussels meeting with NATO and European Union officials. There is an absolute commitment to having the back of the Ukrainian people for as long as it takes. The EU has come together in providing support for the Ukrainian people. NATO has never been stronger than it is right now. Putin has miscalculated. He has strengthened the EU. He has strengthened NATO in a way that it has never been in the past. And so any idea that the Ukrainian people are going to be abandoned by NATO or abandoned by the EU is just completely and totally false. Putin has miscalculated. The Ukrainian people will have the support of the United States, the EU, and NATO for as long as it takes to ensure that there is a victory over the people.
Some of those leaders think that there's still diplomacy possible here.
Diplomacy ultimately is the only answer, but it cannot occur unless there is a guarantee that there will be support for the Ukraine effort. That's what we're doing right now, but ultimately it will be President Zelensky with Putin at the table, finally resolving this conflict. That's the only way in which ultimately we can have peace in Ukraine.
Senator Markey, you had said that, obviously the U.S. needs to continue to do all it can do to support the people of Ukraine while also avoiding direct conflict with Russia. So a two-part question. How difficult has that been to navigate for U.S. lawmakers, and what more do you think the U.S. can do based on your experiences that you just had?
There is a continuation of support for the Ukraine effort to resist, to fight against Putin. That has to continue. We have to ensure that the help is there so that the Ukrainians can fight, and simultaneously that the help is there for the refugees leaving Ukraine. And we have to continue to support them for as long as it takes so that Putin ultimately loses his struggle. We cannot afford to have a war in Europe result in Putin having a victory, because ultimately these other countries that border on it could be next.
Is there anything specific that you think that the U.S. needs to do moving forward that's not happening right now, based on what you've seen?
I visited our installation near the Ukraine border, and it is incredible. The support that is coming, not just from the United States, but from every European nation, all contributing to this effort. And we have to continue to do whatever it takes in order to make sure that the Ukrainians get the help which they need. But I was impressed by the coordinated effort that is now in place to ensure that there is a transfer of the resources into Ukraine to fight against Putin, and simultaneously the resources that are now in Poland and other countries to take care of those who have fled this incredible incursion by Putin into Ukraine.
Senator, back on the topic of refugees, as you probably saw, I think U.S. is ready to accept a fraction of it. We've talked to a lot of humanitarian groups over there who are finding it very surprising that refugees want to go home. They don't want to go to other countries. Did you find that?
Some want to go home, but many do not want to go home, especially those with small children. And I met with many of those families with children who are now in the Polish school system. They do not want to go back until after this war is over, until after Putin has been defeated, until their children can be safe once again back in Ukrainian schools. So some may want to go back, but many more will want to stay until this war has been completed.
Any more insight how we might welcome them to basic?
I think that we should lift the cap on refugees coming, not just to Massachusetts, but to any part of the United States. I think that we have to roll out the welcome to these families and do whatever it takes to finance their arrival into our country and to allow them to stay here for as long as they want. And I think that's just a part of who we are as Massachusetts and the United States of America. So I don't think there should be any limit at all to be placed upon these refugees. But by the way, I feel the same way about refugees coming in from Afghanistan, from other countries in the world. We have right now a humanitarian crisis that we have never seen since World War II. What we've already seen in Kyiv, what we've already seen in other parts of Ukraine, is a demonstration of the resolve of the Ukraine military, of the Ukraine spirit. I think that Putin underestimated what is happening. I think he believed that the Ukraine people would just fold and allow for the Russians to come right into Kyiv. That did not happen. And I think that ultimately the same is going to be true for other parts of that country. There is probably going to be an historic moment before this war ends. What we've seen in Kyiv, I think, is going to be a preview of how Ukrainian people are able to rebuff, to send back to Russia the forces that Putin has sent. So from a Russian perspective, everything thus far has been unexpected, and I think that that level of surprise is going to continue to build because the Ukraine people don't want to allow Russia to occupy the Ukraine home.
What about war? We didn't have the option on this. We now have a car, good transportation. Even if they took transportation,
wherever there is wartime conditions, it's more complicated, without question. But the Ukraine people are resourceful. We have to just help them to be able to ensure that people get the help they need, and to also help all of those who are fleeing violence to get out of Ukraine and to move to Western Europe or to the United States if necessary for the duration of this war. So where it's possible to provide the resources, we have to ensure that we are making it easier for those refugees to get out.
When you were in Brussels, what's the anticipation that NATO could be drawn into this?
NATO will not be drawn into this. Poland is not an article by a country that automatically has NATO joining into the conflict. However, very impressively, on a bilateral basis, every European country is sending resources into Ukraine, as is the United States. So in substitution for NATO, an ad hoc group of countries have come together to ensure that the resources are there, not just military, but also humanitarian, in order to resist Putin's incursion into Ukraine.
So you don't anticipate that happening?
No, there will be, unless Putin attacks an Article 5 country, unless Putin attacks a country that is in NATO, then NATO will not itself engage against Putin. But that does not mean that sufficient military and humanitarian resources will not be provided to the Ukrainian people. That is something that impressively the EU and the United States have found a way of ensuring that those resources do get into the hands of the Ukrainian government and people. Okay, thank you all so much.